Anora, Sean Baker's new film starring Mikey Madison, has been getting heaps of praise since it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It takes a new look at a very old profession by a few careening days in the life of a vibrant young woman, and attempts to confront some very harsh realities about her and all of our lives. But some have questioned if it really manages to subvert those old cliches. So let's take a deeper look at the film to figure out what it all really means. Anora follows Annie, real name Anora, but no one's allowed to call her that, a stripper working in Brooklyn, New York. While performing, she meets Vanya, a Russian immigrant who has come to the US for school and a party. Mostly the latter. They form a connection because she can understand Russian, though doesn't want to speak it. Though they, on the outside, have these kinds of tenuous connections, language, physical attraction, etc., they're never quite truly on the same wavelength, which wouldn't be so bad if the relationship had been contained to a night in the VIP room. But it quickly blossoms into something else. While their differences in nature are more obvious in things like their wealth disparity, we also see it in smaller moments as well. Like when she lifts her feet out of the way of his vacuuming housekeeper, but he doesn't even seem to register that she's there at all. But as the time passes by, Annie continues to let herself be pulled in by the fantasy of the situation, of a rich guy coming in and changing her life. Deep down, she does seem to have an inkling that odds are this won't end up being her happily ever after. But she slowly lets herself slip into the idea that maybe she did get 1 in a million lucky. After a few nights together, he offers to pay her to be his girlfriend for a week. Though we can see that she's starting to fall for him, or rather, the fairy tale idea that she begins to let herself believe might actually be coming true for her.
Cinderella. Yes, Cinderella. You know me so well, babe.
She does still have her mind on her business and bumps her fee up to $15,000. During a whirlwind trip to Las Vegas, he proposes on a whim, mostly because he wants a green card, and they get hitched. Perhaps unsurprisingly, his wealthy parents are none too happy about this and immediately begin working to undo the situation. In the story, we see the intersection of two very different but still stifling environments. Annie's working life, entertaining men for money, and Vanya's life under the thumb of his own parents. Well, obviously Vanya is better off financially. The movie is interested in their shared issue of being trapped within the confines created by what they do for money, and how it informs their behavior. Annie has learned to preen for and create a fantasy for her clients so they pay up, but still keeps a level of confidence in herself outside of that world. Vanya, on the other hand, has totally given himself over to the whims of his parents. He might claim that he hates being under their thumb, but in the end, he isn't really willing to do anything that might risk his inheritance. And through Annie's eyes, we get to see the darkness underneath the fairy tale shimmer of Vanya's world. She knew her own world had its problems, but what she sees from the people in Vanya's life as they attempt to hunt him down is a new kind of darkness. But before we unpack the ending, we should first take a deeper look at the history of Cinderella Stories to better understand how Anora is attempting to subvert the trope. The stories we see focused on sex workers thankfully have begun to shift in the modern era, as the views of the profession itself have begun to change.
Can't believe you hired a prostitute. Sorry, sex worker. You have agency.
Moving away from just having them as background fodder mainly used for punchlines or set dressing.
Surprisingly good.
Right? I told you so.
So-called Cinderella stories.
You give me one example of somebody that we know that had happened
Name
before.
someone?
Yeah,
you want
one
me to
person that
name
it worked
someone?
well
You want me
for.
to, like, give you a name or
Yeah,
something?
I'd like a name.
Cinderella.
Are all about having your fortune changed by a rich guy plucking you out of your misery. Though, as we'll discuss in a moment, that's not actually what Cinderella's story was about. When it comes to working girls, we most often see these stories take place in tandem with the hooker with a heart of gold trope. Pretty Woman still stands as the most iconic example of this, where we see Edward come to fall in love with Vivian because he realizes that she's not like the other girls in his life, but also, importantly, not like the other hookers either.
I will pay you to be at my beck and call.
Look, I'd love to be your beck and call girl, but you're a rich, good-looking guy. You could get a million girls free.
If you want to know more about how the studio forced the creatives to clean up this whole story to make it a rom-com, check out our video on that movie. These kinds of stories often get flack for painting an incorrect picture of what the life is like, allowing a false sense of security that things will always just magically work out well in the end for everyone. Not to mention many of them resting on the idea that one's life turning around is dependent on some kind outsider coming in and finding you special enough to save. But Cinderella stories don't have to follow that framing. Cinderella itself actually doesn't. As we discussed in our video on Cinderella, Though her story has become a bit of a punching bag for some who say that it's just about her being saved by a guy, that isn't really the case. It's really more about her ability to stay sane and forward-thinking in a dreadful situation, the importance of never losing her optimism for life or giving up, and the power of imagination. She does end up with the guy in the end, but that wasn't really ever her goal. She just dreamed of freedom and happiness. And even her desire to go to the ball wasn't about meeting him. She just wanted to have one single night off from being her family's maid and have some fun, and he happened to be there. While he did whisk her off to the Fairytale castle in the end, all of the actual change in her life came from her own work and action. Her building relationships with her animal friends so that they were there for each other when they needed each other most, her ability to imagine a better world for herself and go for it, her keeping an ace up her sleeve. Anora is in many ways the antithesis of the old-school hooker with a heart of gold story. It shows a much more realistic portrayal of how, while this setup might seem like a dream at first, it can quickly become a nightmare. Though how well it does this has been up for debate, which we'll unpack in a moment. Anora is overall more in line with films like Hustlers and The Menu, which are more interested in giving the women themselves a voice, and focusing on how their work intersects with other facets of society and how that all affects them.
They stole from everybody. Hardworking people lost everything. And not one of these went to jail.
There is a long-running trend in Hollywood of making stories about marginalized people and groups without really taking anyone actually from said group into consideration. More so that they can pat themselves on the back for being open-minded than to actually explore these stories in a real way. And with movies centering around marginalized characters, there's sometimes a feeling that people who have the real-world experience of those characters shouldn't share their critiques because they should just be happy to be represented at all, which is obviously unfair. Anora thankfully doesn't fully fall into this category. They did consult real-life strippers about their work and lifestyles for the film, and many who have genuinely lived that life did see some version of their own experiences reflected in the film. As essayist Rax King wrote in her review of the film for Welcome to Hell World, I'm sure plenty of strippers have never fallen in big, irresponsible, week-long love with a customer, but I'm not one of them. Back when I was a stripper, I made great money playing the role of the most glamorous and adoring woman in the world. And I wanted most of my customers to agree that the exchange ended there, just like most of Annie's do. But damned if there wasn't a stubborn, needy little damsel crouching low in my spirit who believed that she might find the prince of her dreams in the VIP room. But of course, no group is a monolith, and some other workers have raised issues with the movie that have seemingly been ignored by critics and larger audiences because it doesn't quite fit with the empowering instant classic trajectory that the film has been on since it premiered. While the movie does, as a whole, seem to desire to focus on Annie's experiences, there are times when it pulls back and shows that, for all it might want to subvert those old tropes, it hasn't quite escaped them. Take the scene in which Vanya ditches Annie when his parents' henchmen show up to the mansion. She's left all alone to fight off 3 scary men. But it's played for laughs. As Marla Cruz wrote for Angel Food magazine, she may be fighting tooth and nail for control over her life, but the scene circumvents empathy for her by inviting the audience to laugh at the screwball energy between her 3 captors. I mulled over the possibility that my fear in those moments, like Annie's, was entirely internal, contained in my corporeal form, and emptied of the potential to provoke sympathy or intervention from the people around me. Not every story on screen has to be one-to-one with reality. But when stories are focusing on marginalized groups and made by people who are not a part of those groups, it is important to take a look at how things are being framed and where outside biases might have crept in. Looking at movies through a critical lens doesn't mean you're a hater, that you think everything is bad, or that you're always looking for a problem. It's just a healthy part of experiencing media. And it's more complex than figuring out which side is right, if the movie is all good or all bad, and more just about thinking fully and critically about the stories we're presented. While Annie is just a character, her story does intersect with real people's real lived experiences. So where does that leave us? In the end, the big question for Annie isn't about choosing forever love over money, or getting swept away by a rich guy and getting both, but instead having to grapple with the reality of how money and power function, and how they work to keep everyone in their place. While Annie fights the annulment at first, the combination of the pressure from his powerful parents and the dawning realization that he's not at all the Prince Charming she had imagined deflates her back down to reality and leads her to eventually relent. Her final scene isn't with Vanya, but instead with Igor, one of the henchmen sent to look for Vanya. They have a connection as two people whose lives are at the whim of the wealthy, doing whatever it takes to keep them happy so that the funds continue to flow. But even in that, they're not totally similar. Igor uses brute force against others, including Annie, to actively push for whatever the wealthy want. She never hurts anyone but herself. There's also some contention around the film labeling itself as a love story. It's clearly not between Annie and Vanya, but we also don't really get to see Annie come to love herself, though there are signs that she's finding a new level of self-acceptance in the end. Instead, maybe, it's about being in love with the idea of love. The fairy tale dream of instant spark love from the movies, and how hollow that actually turns out to be. The film isn't perfect, but it does manage to paint an engaging, vibrant portrait of one young woman's journey through a false fairy tale, coming out the other side not necessarily happier, but with her eyes more open to reality.
That's The Take. Click here to watch the video we think you'll love, or here to check out a whole playlist of awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.